Check the description for the rest of the
life that you're living out into this vicious circle where the story and the presence of life, where the concepts and the rationalizations and justifications and the experience of life are really kind of jammed together. And I'm suggesting to you that no matter how clever you are, no matter what circumstances you put into the vicious circle, what you're going to get out of it is what you can get out of a vicious circle in terms of your own effectiveness and in terms of the quality of your life. Now, a very strange thing happens when you push this question, what kind of a being is a human being, you push it really hard. And we've only tapped at it a little bit tonight. But we've kind of tapped at it across a fairly broad spectrum and covered a lot of ground. We haven't been able to go very deeply, but we've been able to go fairly extensively into the kind of being that a human being is. And if you can confront your own inauthenticity, once you can be with your own inauthenticity, this resignation to the inauthenticity begins to break up. And a question arises. Now, that question is around all the time like a defense, like a way to survive. People are always, in some form or another, asking about possibility, what choices do I have, what can I do with my life, and what should I be doing with my life, and what did I do with my life, and was it right, was it wrong, all that stuff. Listen, the question, what is the possibility of being, like capital B, what is the possibility of being for human beings? Asked against the background of being inauthentic about your inauthenticity. Asked in this environment of being, which should be called resignation. Asked in the space of the cover-up of our own inauthenticity is always more of our inauthenticity. It's always more of a survival ploy, always more of a survival strategy. And so there are lots of answers to the question, what is the being of human beings? Sorry, there are lots of answers to the question, what is the possibility of being for human beings? And almost none of the answers makes any real difference in people's everyday being in the world. I told you that this work that we call transformation, that we do in the forum, a taste of which we're giving you tonight, was a way of engaging in these questions that are at the heart of the matter for human beings, such that the engaging, the inquiry, the questioning shows up in people's everyday being in the world as a kind of breaking open for that. You'll find yourself, I promise, going through the things you go through every day, and suddenly there'll be a bit of a breaking open here. There'll be a sense of freedom where earlier there were only a given set of options about which you needed to be clever. Suddenly there'll be a breaking open, a freedom to be with that which you couldn't be with very well before. Someplace else in your life, there'll be a sense of being able to be with something that was kind of clouding you, something that was pushing you, something that was confining you, just by virtue of this inquiry, not because you found the prescription, not because you got the answer, not because you know the recipe, not because you got the solution, but just by virtue of this special way of inquiring into these questions. Just by having been here, there'll be a certain empowerment in the face of the risk that being alive is. And you'll find that happening. You'll try to dominate the ruthless rules of reality or avoid the domination of the insights that you find. However, if you really push this question, which we've been addressing tonight, what is the being of human beings? It brings you authentically out the other side, at the end of it, like the beginning of something, where the beginning is a question, namely, what is the possibility of being for human beings? Now, I don't suppose that that's happened to you very naturally tonight, because as I said, we're doing in 3.5 hours what people have been working on since the beginning of civilization. But I say that it happens very naturally. When you cover the ground authentically, when you start to live with your own inauthenticity, and not ask the question as another ploy to try to avoid your inauthenticity, but just asking the question like a possibility, what is the possibility of being for human beings? Well, the first thing that comes up when you ask the question, what is the possibility of being for human beings? The answer that comes up, the first thing that comes up is there isn't any possibility of being for human beings. And if you don't get to that, you don't get any further. There just isn't any possibility of being for human beings. What you showed up in did not include being. It isn't interested in being. It has nothing to do with being. It is only concerned with survival. So there is no possibility of being for human beings. And that's a part of being authentic about your own inauthenticity. And if you can really be with that, and I doubt that you can fully, you can be with the emptiness and meaninglessness which you are. You can be with the emptiness and the meaninglessness of life as a thunderstorm about which we tell a story. That kind of a thunderstorm. Suddenly, the emptiness and the meaninglessness, when it's lost its meaning that it's empty and meaningless, suddenly becomes a clearing in which to stand and look out for the possibility of being for human beings. See, that which starts out as a threat becomes an opening, a clearing, when you can be with it authentically. And if you are being with it authentically, you're clear that there is no possibility of being for human beings. Now, what do good human beings do in that situation? What would a good human being do? All the good human beings you know. What would you do about it? You would change it. That's what you would do. You would. You would change it. Without ever recognizing that change is something from something. See, change is something which comes from or is made from something. But there is no possibility for being for human beings. So change won't work. Because change only alters the circumstances in a vicious circle, only becomes another form of survival. Creation is something from nothing, from the no possibility of being for human beings, from the emptiness and meaninglessness of the thunderstorm which we are, from that emptiness and meaninglessness, from that no possibility, from nothing, something. Really, really, have you got anything in your whole life which isn't predicated on something? No. You haven't got anything in your whole life which isn't a predicate, which isn't predicated on something. Everything in our lives is a derivative. We're always living into the options. And to create is to act without predicate, to act from nothing. What is it for a human being to act from nothing? Well, first off, you have to restore to yourself the nothingness which you are. You have to restore to yourself the emptiness and the meaninglessness of this very enticing thunderstorm which you are. Now, you notice I haven't changed anything about the inauthenticity which we are. I'm simply showing that being authentic about our own inauthenticity opens, like a question, in a very natural way, the possibility of being for human beings. And without the foundation of being authentic about our own inauthenticity, the question is just another clever dodge in the issue of our survival. Even if you restore the distinctions, so that when life is a concept, it can show up for you like a concept. And when life is present, it can show up for you like a presence, and you have a distinction between the two so that they can show up as they are. Even then, there's no being here. You notice the rest of the board is blank. Because there isn't anything there. And if anything is to be there, it will have to be there as an act of existential courage. That is to say, as an act without any basis, without any propping, without any support, without any rationalization, justification, or explanation. Something like what Weber's talking about when he says, "Here I stand." Now, for those of you who think that what I'm saying is some kind of mystical hocus pocus, I want to be clear with you that it is not. That this is rigorous and accountable, in that a domain of being predicated on nothing would demonstrate its validity in the actions which were derived from it and in the alteration of the circumstances which those actions provide. By the same token, if you're thinking that I'm saying that being can be evidenced, it cannot. There is neither a predicate for nor evidence of being. Being, capital B, or more rigorously, the possibility of being for human beings could be said, being like a possibility, being as itself, not being like a presence, not being like a concept, but being as itself could be said to be the stand that I am, the stand I take. Being, like the possibility of being, could be said to be the stand that I am, the stand I take. In other words, the possibility of being at all, where by being we mean possibility, so I know this is hard, but to say it accurately, the possibility of possibility, not the possibility of an option, not something derivative, not in the set to which you are already resigned, not to that which is using you. But the possibility of a possibility, not an option, not a strategy, not a new maneuver, not a change, not a change, no, not a change, but a possibility. The possibility of possibility is a product of taking a stand for the possibility of being the stand you take. Where the stand which you are is a clearing for that for which you stand. Okay, we started out by talking about you, that you are the I, and I think, I feel, I believe, and I suggested to you that out on the banks of the Potomac, 3 o'clock in the morning on a clear night, you look up, you'll see what concern the universe has for the you, which you are, that you are. And in a very subtle way, I invited you to the possibility of yourself as emptiness and meaninglessness, in which possibility, if you engage it authentically, you begin to see that empty and meaningless is also a clearing for. Maybe you aren't that which is pointed to in the phrase, I like, I want, I think. Maybe you're the kind of nothing, the kind of empty, the kind of meaninglessness, the kind of not going anywhere, the kind of emptiness and meaninglessness, which is a clearing for life to show up in, like a possibility, like something from nothing. Yes, against the background of culture and practices and language, certainly always against that background. I'm inviting you to consider the possibility of being as the possibility of taking a stand for your being the stand that you take. I'm inviting you to stand in the possibility that your life could be lived into possibility, like into the stand which you are, where the stand becomes a clearing, an opening, a freedom, a possibility for that for which you stand, rather than living into the options of the vicious circle. Now you'll notice that I won't get very far in this. Again, I said a taste, but a taste is enough. The invitation here is to live in the question, what is the possibility for being for human beings? Not like a way to survive, but like an opening, like a possibility. See, I'm afraid that you keep listening possibility like option. I'm talking about outside the 9 dots. I'm talking about outside the options which are using us, while being authentic about being used by those options. I'm inviting you to create a question into which to live your life. I say people live their lives into that vicious circle. They live their lives into their past. They live their lives into the resignation of the options which are using them. I'm inviting you, given that you now perhaps recognize the superstitions, some of the superstitions which were using you, I'm inviting you to create a question like an opening, not like looking for an answer, but like an opening. I'm inviting you to create a question into which to live your life. A question in which your everyday concerns show up in the question. Same everyday concerns you've always had, but now instead of showing up in the resignation of the options. I'm inviting you to the other promise in transformation. Besides these openings, besides these freedoms, a like way of being empowered. A question that gives direction to your living, where the everyday concerns and your everyday being in the world are the material with which you are asking the question. To live into such a question is not to live into the resignation into which we wake up. Please notice I haven't recommended that you now have a new belief, which wakes you up. Rather, I've invited you to create a question out in front of your life into which you can live your life, and in which question, like a possibility, like an opening, not like a question looking for an answer, but like a question, like a possibility, like an opening, in which your everyday being in the world can show up and your everyday concerns for living can show up. So that's the front of the hand, and the back of the hand of transformation. The front of the hand is to engage in these questions in such a way that they show up as breaking opens, freedoms, empowerment in the face of your everyday concerns, your everyday being in the world. The other side of the possibility of transformation is to create a space for yourself in which to live that enlivens your living, that allows you to live a possibility instead of a set of options. Now, I know it's a little frightening in actually doing it. So to stand in front of a blank canvas, you can create. And standing in front of a blank canvas is frightening. Most people are way more comfortable living with the strategies which the options present for them. It takes courage to live into the opening of a question. And it transforms the quality of one's life in very practical, hard-headed, being effective in the world ways. And in addition, in opening up life as a possibility rather than as a given set of options. So I'm leaving you in front of a blank canvas. I'm not leaving you with a message. I'm not leaving you with an answer. I'm not leaving you with a prescription. I'm not leaving you any better than you were when you walked in. I'm not leaving you improved. I'm leaving you with a blank canvas, with an invitation. What we're talking about is a little bit like an example I'm going to give you out of evolution. We're told that life begins as a bit of protoplasm in a tropical sea, and at eons of time, you get life all over the sea in many various forms, and so on and so forth. That's what we're told. We're told that life in the sea has evolved to cover every niche and cranny in the sea. So there's life all over the sea from top to bottom, from fresh to salt, from one sea to another. And then there's this story about a fish who walks up on land. And I say that that's not evolution. That is to say, that happens in an instant compared to evolution. And in that instant, elephants and eagles come into existence like a possibility. For me, the possibility, the opening, the freedom, the chance to live with those concerns, with those questions, makes life an enormous privilege. So being here tonight with you is, for me, a very profound privilege. And for that privilege, I want to thank you. Good night.